Today is Friday, okay, 09 February. Yesterday, at around 1800 Eastern Time, the interview between Tucker Carlson and President Vladimir Putin was released. I watched it twice. It is a 2-hour-long interview. It's not short. It is, I don't know what it is. It is many things. And there's no way to really throw a word out there or an adjective and just completely sum it up. If you have not watched it and you are keeping track of what is going on, not just with our country, but you know, the entire world, I would urge you heavily to watch it. Not so much watch it, I mean, yeah, you can watch it, right? What you really need to do is listen to it. And you have to listen to it. Okay, you have to devote your attention to this. This isn't background noise. This is 2 hours that I would urge you to listen and think about what is being said, because there was a lot said. Here are my impressions of it. I'm gonna try to word this the best I can to describe honestly what I took away from this. Like I said, I've watched it twice. It's 4 hours I've devoted to this over the last 2 days. I obviously don't know why Tucker, what his true intentions were when he was setting this up and actually interviewing Vladimir Putin. I don't know him, okay? Same old disclaimer, I don't know the guy. I can tell you that my level of trust in Tucker Carlson is reasonably high for somebody I've never met. I know, and I almost did a video on this prior to the entire interview being released. The mainstream media was melting down, having a conniption fit, just losing their minds over the fact that Tucker Carlson was going to Russia to interview Putin. Putin has been interviewed before, okay? This isn't the first time by American media. We've even heard some of the talking heads on TV, you know, as far as early as Wednesday, saying that, well, you know, we've tried to interview him and he won't talk to us. You know, outlets like CNN, MSNBC, MSDNC, I was gonna say this, I mean, that's actually what they are. And that's the reason they don't get the interview. And there is also so much more to that. I'm not gonna play any part of the interview. It's up to you to go find it. I'm gonna tell you what I heard. The way it starts off, Tucker Carlson, he gets right to the heart of the matter, right? Like, why did you invade Ukraine? That was the first question he asked Putin. Why'd you do it? His answer not only serves to ask Tucker Carlson a very important question, okay? He answered Tucker with his own question, because Tucker's answer to this question that I'm about to tell you, what Putin asked of Tucker, would dictate the entire rest of the interview. What Putin understands, and what a lot of us understand, there is a difference between a real interview, okay, an actual conversation, versus what we usually get, and what we always get on mainstream media. Okay, what we get on mainstream media are the talk shows, the sound bites, right? Like the gotcha moments, you know, like the, oh yeah, you said you told them. The interviewer will ask them questions that they can then respond to with inflammatory comment. You know what I'm talking about. What Putin asked Tucker was, are we having a talk show or are we having a serious conversation? And then Tucker laughed. I don't know what he thought. I guess I could see the humor there. It's almost like a ironic humor. But Putin didn't laugh. He kind of smiled, because he knew that Tucker wasn't really tracking yet what we're doing here and what Tucker had gotten himself into. So Putin just waits. He kind of smiles and he waits. Tucker laughs, and eventually Tucker says, we're having a serious conversation. From that moment forward, it was gonna be a long interview. Putin, you could see, he settled back. He kind of just said, okay, here we go. This is my evening. And then he proceeds to answer Tucker's initial question. Why did you do it? And the way he answered this question was by giving him all of the information, all of it, dating all the way back to 800 AD. Pretty much the entire history of how this little area of the world, Ukraine, how it came to be, what parts belong to which countries, what those countries did to get those parts, how they lost those parts of territory because Ukraine was not always Ukraine. Ukraine is a recent invention. The land's been there for forever. Different countries have owned different parts of it. And Tucker, you know, he even admits, he does a forward at the beginning of the interview where he says he thought that, you know, Putin was trying to filibuster, like give a long-winded answer because, you know, those cheap little tactics that we use, especially over here on mainstream media, you see them do it all the time. They'll give some long-worded runaround where they just say a bunch of words, right? Like they throw out a bunch of buzzwords, don't really answer the question, but it sounds like they've said a lot. That's not what Putin was doing. And Tucker had asked a question and Putin was going to answer it, but they were having a serious conversation. These aren't sound bites. He gave the entire history of the area, the entire history. I don't know how, first of all, Vladimir Putin, I don't know how somebody, I mean, the guy is like an encyclopedia of a history because he remembered things like dates, and I'm talking about stuff that's happened in 1600s. He was talking about the borders past that to the, you know, the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I, World War II, all the different states, that this little part of the world and how it all changed according to the countries surrounding it. The reason he did this is because there are things that happen in those parts of the world that you and we may hear once or twice in our life, right? Like there may be a reference to that thing or that event. And it's not something, you know, to us, it's ancient history and it happened all the way across on the other side of the world. What we have to understand, it's their history and it happened in their backyard. What one country does to another country, and then that country hits them back with something, this and that, the loss of land, the conquering of other land, all of those things. Think about how long that side of the world has been lived on by humans and all of the history there. You and we don't see it like they do. You have to think of all the history that is over there. That is a very old part of the world, and there has been many things that have happened there. And for us to sit over here and judge that, man, it's fine. You can judge whatever you want, right? You can think whatever you want. But if you want to be informed and you want to make a good decision, right? Like you want to make a good judgment, you learn first, then you speak. So Putin was trying to correct that. Rightfully so. We're all the way over here. Why would we know all the things that he knows? I don't know how anybody could know what he knows. I mean, the guy was like, he's basically Wikipedia on Russia. He's the president, been so for like 20 years. So, you know, that kind of makes sense. I can't speak to his morals. I don't know him. I'm sure being a veteran of the government and a veteran statesman, he's probably done some pretty reproachable things. I can only imagine that my observations of who he is on a personal level, what little we got, Putin is an adult. He's a veteran statesman, and he is trying to work under those rules, like those old rules, those old statesmanship rules. That's what he's trying to work under. The world ain't that anymore. And I mean that in a bad way, that everybody else is playing by the same rules. And I think it's finally really maybe dawning on him that we aren't working under those old rules, the old rules of statesmanship, right? Of where nations will do what is in their best interest. And he even mentions this a few times. There's also something else I noticed. The questions that Tucker Carlson was asking him. Of course, Tucker Carlson starts with the questions we all want to know the answers to right off the bat. It goes right into that. Makes sense. Tucker Carlson wanted to get the hard questions out of the way first. He did that, and he got very long, detailed answers. Much more so than I think he was accustomed to. And that's when I kind of got this impression of, and I don't mean this in a bad way against Tucker Carlson. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Tucker, but it was right about the time when I guess the second or third question, I started to get this feeling that Tucker was kind of out of his depth a little bit. Tucker Carlson, he does a lot of great interviews, don't get me wrong. I'm like I said, I'm a big fan, okay? But he interviews a lot of the people over here, the notable people, okay? For instance, like, you know, he just did one with Russell Brand. All fine, that's fine. Those are interviews I'll watch. They're entertaining, right? Entertaining interviews. Putin is not an entertainer. He's in a position with a lot of responsibility, and he takes it very seriously, deadly seriously. And he expects everybody else, his colleagues, as he calls them, on the world stage to do the same. It was a stark contrast to, I think, what Tucker Carlson's really been doing for quite a while now. It's like he was punching above his weight a little bit. It's almost like he had to switch gears, like he had to remember what he was doing and who he was talking to. And I think he did that successfully, because at first he started with the interruptions a lot because he thought Putin was giving him the runaround on the answers. And Putin, he would wait for Tucker to get done with his interruption, and then he would say things like, "I'm getting to that," or "I know this is boring, but this is important," as a response to Tucker's interruptions. Patient professor or teacher before he continued with his lecture. That's what it honestly reminded me of, was a lecture. They got through that part of the interview. Fair enough. The questions from Tucker, he runs out of the questions that he thinks everybody wants to know. By way of Putin's answers, Tucker starts to realize that he's not just talking to the president of Russia. He's talking to somebody that is paying very close attention, not just to what's happening in Russia, Europe. He's paying attention to the entire world. And this really struck me as kind of odd, the direction the interview took. It started to go away from the direction of, why do you do this X thing that you do? It started to go in a direction totally away from Russia. He was asking him questions about China, for instance, BRICS, like AI, religious questions, the world and our species and our civilization as a whole. Putin, I think it kind of took him by surprise. He was, I guess, expecting more focused questions on what he was doing. And he even, he laughed a couple of times at a lot of Tucker, these big questions. Like, I don't know, why are you asking me? You need to ask somebody that knows more about this stuff. He literally said that on one question about AI. I don't know the big numbers. You need to talk to somebody. Just the fact that the interview took that turn, you can see why it did. The answers that Tucker was getting on the questions he was asking, they were genuine answers. I'm sure there were a few lies or a few half-truths, right, that Putin told, and a lot of the times Putin would just stop himself. Like, he would just basically stop himself from saying a lie, but he would say, I can't talk to you about that. Or, we're going to leave that in the hands of this agency or this service, right? Overall, what really struck me was the maturity and his wish to get people to understand why he's doing what he's doing. Now, whether it be right or wrong, there are reasons. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, I don't know Putin, obviously, but he is not, I would bet money on this, he's not the kind of guy that wakes up in the morning, you know what I'm gonna do today? I'm gonna invade Ukraine. Putin ain't that guy. Just from listening to him for 2 hours answer questions, he is very, very calculating. And some of the answers to the questions that he gives, he puts back on the US. Putin references several times where they were at the table with Ukraine trying to resolve it, trying to negotiate a peace, right? And then Ukraine was yanked back from the table. People on Ukraine's side, right? Like countries like the United States, Germany, whatever the case. They told Putin, you can't expect Ukraine to negotiate with a gun to their head. Meaning that Putin's troops that were right outside of Kyiv, like they were right there pointing guns at Kyiv, so it's hard to negotiate with that kind of pressure. So Putin says, okay, fine, we'll pull the troops back. As soon as he pulled his troops back, now that's according to him, and I'm sure we can look it up, all the people on Ukrainian side of the negotiating table threw everything in the trash and walked away. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way it happened, because Ukraine did pull out of the negotiations. Why? Tucker asked him that question. You know what his answer was? Go ask them. Here's the other part of this interview that really struck me. Several times, Tucker asks questions. He tries to kind of inflame a response, right? Like a good interviewer will kind of err on that side of things sometimes, right? To get a reaction from the person being interviewed, to get a little drama in there. Putin doesn't take the bait at all. He had multiple opportunities to disparage Joe Biden, to disparage Zelensky, and Tucker kind of tried to kind of lead him in that direction. He would not say a bad word about any of them. And what do we get in return? What do we get from our side? calling him names, sanctions this, all this stuff about him being a war criminal. He needs to be charged. And Putin, he won't say a bad word about any of it. Even the guy he's at war with, he won't talk bad about. And he was pushed by Tucker Carlson, had ample opportunity to even kind of slightly graze him a little bit, and he wouldn't do it. He didn't talk disparagingly about any group of people except for the Nazis. The denazification thing, yeah, you need to look into that. There's a little bit more there than what you might think. Do you remember, and this was a couple of months ago, okay? Zelensky went to Canada, to their parliament. I'm sure this will probably ring a bell for some of you that are paying attention. There was somebody they stood up and acknowledged in parliament. Come to find out it was some kind of Nazi sympathizer or something, Nazi guy living in Canada, acknowledged live standing in Canadian parliament. Not only that, when you look back through history and you look at the groups of people that were fighting during World War II in these areas, there are a lot more different conflicted, shattered sides than you might think. For instance, look up Lenin's Cossacks. The Soviets were fighting the Germans. Were all Soviets fighting the Nazis? What do you think? Look it up. Any that weren't and were collaborating, and there were a lot of Polish people, the entire Polish government, they didn't fight to the death. France didn't fight to the death. They surrendered. Well, guess what? All those people that were either collaborating with or fighting for the Germans in World War II, they had legacies. Some of them are still alive today. Very few of them, but they are there. Some of them live in freaking Canada, apparently. And it turns out some of what they passed down weren't just family names. It was ideology, memorials. Turns out there's a lot more there than you might think. But as far as the right-wing nationalistic fascism problem in Ukraine, I would go out on a limb and say it's a lot bigger problem than you and I will ever know. Do you remember the story about the Nazi that was in Parliament? Literal Nazi. Do you remember that story? You may have seen it for like a day, and then it was gone. I want you to think about that. What are they always screaming about the right wing here? What's the worst thing? The worst thing you can be in America right now. The worst thing. What is it? What do they always go to? You know it. You know what they say. You know what they call you. You've got a literal Nazi being praised in Canadian Parliament. Where is that story? Yeah, it lasted maybe a day or two. Then it just kind of poof. Putin made that point too. One would think that would be a much bigger deal to us, especially our country, because we're so scared of going down this Nazi road. These people over here, they don't know what it is they are talking about at all. It's becoming more and more clear to me as time goes on what side our government is actually on. Because how the rest of the world sees us, objectively sees us, man, you think we're the good guys? Bro, Ukraine isn't the good guy in any fight, in any shape, form, or fashion. Does Russia have problems with what it's done throughout? Yeah. And I would say there's probably still a fair amount of corruption in the Russian government. You know which government I think is actually higher in corruption per capita? Ukraine, the 7th most corrupt country in the entire world. What side are we on, man? Like, what have we done? And I fear that this is the case, and has been the case for a long time. We get one side of the story over here. You go to the other side of the world, where all these events have happened over hundreds, thousands of years. I think you're gonna find that the story is a little bit more complex, just from what you see portrayed, and what you're told by the mainstream media. I believe that's why they were losing their ever-loving minds about this interview, why they did not want it to happen. We're gonna get that other point of view, the one that they don't like. Well, we got 2 hours of it. When you really stop and look at a lot of the actions that we have taken, there's a part of you that wants to scratch your head and be like, why? Like, why? Well, we ain't the only ones. Tucker Carlson asked Putin point blank, just blurted it out, did you blow up the Nord Stream pipeline? Putin laughed and said, no, you did. Tucker made a joke about, he was busy that day or whatever. Putin said, your alibi may be strong. Your country, not so much. whenever you're looking for who committed a crime, you need to look for who had the motive. Think about that for a minute. That's an act of war. Somebody committed against Russia. How much restraint, how much patience does this guy have? Is it infinite though? Is anybody's patience infinite? I think it would behoove the United States and NATO as a whole to remember that. Do you think he's letting it go? He's forgiving it? No, we're making history. Whenever we do a thing, he remembers it. And he may not lash back like a toddler, right? Like so many of us do, especially our leaders now. They behave like freaking hyperactive toddlers with giant guns. Do not mistake his patience for weakness. And I really wish that our leaders were mature and adult enough to realize that, but they're not. They're just corrupt little toddlers, little children running around trying to grab all the candy they can before the candy runs out. He's giving Ukraine the opportunity to do the right thing and come back to the negotiation table. If Ukraine wants to survive, if they want to keep their soldiers alive, they would go to the negotiation table. That's what it's for. That's why it's there. You know why they don't have to? You know why they feel like they don't have to go sacrifice and have peace talks with Russia? Do you know why? I can tell you why. I can tell you exactly why. They're being told they can't by us. They're being made to believe they don't have to because we're sending them hundreds of billions of dollars in money, weapons, equipment, vehicles, and ammo. When you're being propped up by one of the most powerful countries in the world, if you've got an empire backing your shithole country, do you think that little country's gonna surrender, that they're gonna make any kind of sacrifices? Because that's what negotiation is. That's what peace talks are. Both sides make concessions to come to an agreement to end the hostilities. What do you think? Billions of dollars for what? What's the end goal here? That's how much power they have. The fact that they can tell you that Russia's big bad guy, Ukraine's the good guy. That's true power. Just saying.